This is Joe Grunfast, back again with some awesome new stuff to share with you guys. In the following tutorial, which was published in this year's Christmas issue of 3D World magazine, I'll be showing you the process I used to create this concept painting of the Joker. I used my first ZBrush model, which I made back in 2007, as a base to start with. The Joker from 2007 was comprised of a ZBrush render on a photo background. My mentor Yariv and I tossed around a few thumbnail sketches of grander designs. The first step was to give him a body and a pose, for which I referenced this Jim Lee image. First, I refined the bust by improving the facial anatomy with the Move and Clay buildup brushes. I adjust the tension of the skin around the smile, shape of the ears, contours of the forehead, and reduce the bulbous nose. I'll continue to refine the face throughout the project. I recycled the torso from a previous project, and I subdivide to a density equal to the bust, merged the two subtools, then dynamesh them together. With the head and torso now one piece, I Z-remesh to decrease the poly count and refine the edge flow to create my base mesh. To add the detail back into the face, I add higher subdivisions and mask off the body, fading it into the head. This adds fall off in the neck area, which minimizes distortion from the projection due to discrepancy in shapes. With the duplicate of the bust, I project to create the bust's detail on the face of the new base mesh. I use the transpose rotation tool for posing. First, I mask out an extremity, invert, then draw out the transpose line from my intended pivot point, an elbow for example. By pushing or pulling the opposite end of the transpose line, the tool acts as a lever which maneuvers the unmasked portion into position. I rough out a pose based on the Jim Lee drawing. I tend to favor the Clay Buildup and Damien Standard brushes when sculpting a character's musculature. I rough out the major muscle groups and use the H-polish brush to refine the masses. It's best practice to get the proportions as close to final as possible at each given subdivision level rather than trying to sculpt at the highest level right off the bat. Also, it goes without saying that knowledge of anatomy is key in determining where to put your brushstrokes. Design can be approached in a manner based on proximity. In ZBrush, the lower subdivisions only permit for blocking out silhouettes and main masses, aspects of the model seen from a far proximity. As subdivision levels increase, so do finer details observable from shorter distances, like muscle tone and skin pores. The challenge is striking a harmony between all of these levels. This philosophy is called proximity-based styling, perfecting levels of detail based on viewer distance. After loading a revolver reference image into Spotlight in the texture menu, I select the Z-Modeler brush and initialize with a box primitive from the tool menu. Using Q-Mesh option, I extrude the contours of the gun and its components. With dynamic subdivision enabled, I'm able to see a real-time subdivided preview of my low-poly modeling progress. I initialize another box primitive and Q-Mesh extrusions to the proportions of a playing card deck. Using a combination of transpose move and line segment insertions, I distort the center of the deck upward, making it seem as if it's bending in the Joker's hand. I frame the scene with additional flying cards using the same Z-Modeler process, and I position them with transpose move. I wanted to do something a little different for the Joker's wardrobe. I decided on a Snack Pack logo t-shirt as a reference to Harley Quinn and her pet name for him, Puddin'. I paint a mask over the torso and use extract mesh to generate the general shape of the shirt. After Z-remeshing to create a base mesh, I subdivide and sculpt drapery folds of varying size with the Damn Standard and Clay Buildup brushes. I use a set of skin pore alphas in the drag brushstroke to add pore detail to the highest levels of subdivision on the body. Dividing the hair into polygroups provides for ease of grooming. To do this, I first divide the scalp into polygroups, then mask the scalp off to designate the placement of the fibers. In FiberMesh preview mode, I experiment with the settings and color until I get a natural looking crop of hair. To get a head start on grooming, I position the head 90 degrees to the camera, turn up the gravity, which slicks the hair back. ZBrush offers a set of grooming brushes specifically for FiberMesh. Going polygroup by polygroup, I experiment by using a combination of Groomer Strong, Groom Clumps, and Groom Turbulence. I use muted colors with a range of dirt alphas in conjunction with the drag rectangle and airbrush strokes to give him kind of a diseased, sallow appearance in poly painting. I save a few images from the net as textures for the eyes, t-shirt graphic, and card deck, and I use Spotlight to paint the color information from the images directly onto the model. After using UV Master for unwrapping, I extract the poly paint data to textures based on the new UV sets. With the t-shirt unwrapped, I can now add finer detail like subtle fabric patterns using Noisemaker. I export everything to Keyshot, and I experiment with different viewing angles and materials. Dragging while holding Alt drops the material onto the model and retains its textures. I apply a translucent material to the body, metal for the revolver, plastic for the card deck, cloth for the shirt, and advanced for the hair. I light the model using an HDRI image and light materials applied to sphere geometry added to the scene. I try for an ominous mood by tweaking the light material sliders, increasing contrast and rim lighting. In KeyShot, you can set up render passes with alphas for each material. To create render alphas, I select Add New Render Layer from the drop-down menu for each part of the model in the scene editor. You can also generate object masks by checkmarking Clown Pass in the render dialog. With my camera angle chosen, I set a high resolution and hit render to create my first batch of passes for use in Photoshop. To set up my passes for composite and paint in Photoshop, I first open all of the outputted KeyShot renders. From the File menu, I select Scripts, then Load Files into Stack. This opens a dialog where I can create a new document with all of my passes on separate layers by selecting all of the open files and hitting OK. All of my passes are now lined up and arranged on separate layers in a single document. I quickly photobash a first painting concept by cutting and pasting elements from alleyway photography, setting the Joker lurking in a creepy dark alley. Not terribly inspired with these results, I bounce a few ideas off Yariv and we decide on a dramatic new story direction, setting the scene from the terrified point of view of Arkham Asylum's warden as the Joker, having broken into his office and doused him with gasoline, assaults him with a flaming card deck. I quickly arrange a scene in 3D Studio Max rather than hunt for all the photography I'd need to photobash so specific a scene or paint it from scratch. With my scene set up, I can rapidly move elements around, create approximate lighting, and fine-tune the composition. I import the office geometry into KeyShot and replicate my 3ds Max lighting concept with light materials. I keep the materials on the geometry basic since the renders will only be serving as a base for the painting. I add a few new ZBrushed elements to complete the story, like the bang flag for the revolver and the warden's gasoline-drenched hands. I then render with layers. Immediately, this new story direction feels more cohesive with the Joker model. I blend Joker passes together, perfecting the lighting on the body. I photobash in flames and build up layers of painted details where needed. Combining renders and photos, I can generate whatever pass necessary, be it shadow, diffuse, or reflection using airbrush and eraser tools. I collapse layer groups to individual layers, simplifying the document, and I paint finer details like hairs on the warden's hands, wet look for his sleeve, miscellaneous bookshelf objects, and a little flame above the bang flag, signifying that it's actually a lighter. I save the painting as a PNG and overlay a subtle grain as a final step to unify and blend the composition. The end result, as compared to the Joker image from 2007, is now a fully realized digital illustration, with strength in its concept and drama in its story.